They fired me. Effective immediately. The words slid across the glass conference table like they weighed nothing, just another decision on a crowded agenda. No build-up, no explanation. Taryn Blake didn't even look up when she said it. She sat at the head of the table posture, flawless, scrolling through spreadsheets on her tablet. A red stylus tapped against the screen in short, controlled movements, circling numbers like they offended her personally. Early 40s, sharp-suit executive precision in every gesture, the kind of leader who understood margins, not machinery. Behind her sat two strangers, one from legal, rigid and quiet, the other a consultant in an expensive suit, typing like he already owned the room. No one from operations. No one who had ever stood on a production line at 2 a.m. trying to stop a cascade failure. I kept my hands flat on the table. I'm initiating an immediate transition, she continued, tone-clipped and efficient. We're eliminating external dependencies. Systems management will be brought in-house for cost control. 28 years. That's how long I'd spent building systems that didn't just generate reports, but kept 12 facilities synchronized across 4 states, 2,400 employees, 180 million in active orders moving through machines that required precision down to milliseconds. I wasn't a line item, I was the system. Then she finally looked at me. Before you leave, she said, tapping the stylus, once you'll transfer the entire system. Source code, infrastructure, access, back-end credentials. Full documentation. We expect delivery by end of business today. The room went still. The legal advisor shifted in her chair. The consultant paused mid-keystroke. I didn't move. I just smiled. Small, controlled. I'm afraid I can't do that. Her stylus stopped mid-air. Excuse me. I leaned back slightly, meeting her eyes for the first time. The system, I said calmly, doesn't belong to you. A flicker crossed her face, brief, almost invisible. Confusion. Because what Taryn Blake didn't realize was that 3 minutes earlier, she had just terminated the only person who actually controlled it. Before we continue, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. When you do, you're not just supporting a channel, you're helping stories like this reach someone who might need it at the exact right moment. I'm also curious, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. The next part of this story includes some fictional elements and AI-assisted details crafted for emotional and educational purposes. Thank you for being here. And if today isn't the right moment for you, that's okay. Take a break, take care of yourself. The story will still be here when you're ready to come back. I've seen that look before. The brief pause. The quiet recalculation behind confident eyes. It usually happens when someone realizes just a little too late that they're missing a piece of the system they thought they understood. Taryn Blake recovered quickly. We paid for the development, she said, voice tightening just enough to reveal the crack. That makes it company property. The consultant beside her leaned forward slightly, ready to reinforce her point. Legal remained silent, which told me everything I needed to know. I shook my head. You paid for operational access, I said evenly. Not ownership. That distinction is clearly outlined in Section 7 of your service agreement. A subtle shift moved through the room. The consultant stopped typing. The legal advisor's fingers hovered over her tablet, then slowly began scrolling. Taryn didn't look down immediately. She held my gaze as if refusing to acknowledge the possibility that she might be wrong. This is standard practice, she replied more firmly now. We are not dependent on external vendors to run core infrastructure. I almost smiled again. Not because she was wrong, but because she was so confidently wrong. You're not dependent on a vendor, I said. You're dependent on a system you never owned. That landed harder. The silence stretched longer this time. Not awkward, just heavy. Like the air before something breaks. Taryn finally glanced down at her screen. Her stylus tapped once, then again, faster now, searching. I could almost see the clause appearing in front of her, the one George Whitman had insisted on reviewing, line by line, 5 years ago before signing. George understood how things actually worked. He had walked those factory floors. He knew that what I built wasn't software you could download or replicate. It was infrastructure. Custom logic layered over real-world constraints. Systems designed to respond to stress, not just display it. Taryn, on the other hand, saw a cost column, and she wanted it gone. "We're moving forward with internal management," she said after a moment, voice controlled again, but colder now. "You'll provide whatever materials are necessary for continuity. That's not optional." I nodded once. "I'll provide exactly what your contract entitles you to receive. Nothing more." Her jaw tightened. "That will be sufficient," she said quickly, already shifting her attention back to the tablet, signaling the conversation was over. But it wasn't over, not even close. Because what Taryn Blake still didn't understand, what none of them in that room understood, was that the system running their entire manufacturing network didn't exist on their servers. It never had. There was no central database they could copy, no repository they could clone, no credentials that would unlock real control. What they had was an interface, dashboards, visualizations, clean, polished layers designed to make complexity look simple. What I had was everything underneath: custom-built hardware, dedicated control pathways, coordination logic that lived outside their infrastructure, designed that way on purpose after lessons I learned the hard way years ago. And when she terminated my contract, she didn't just remove a vendor. She disconnected the only bridge between what they could see and what actually made everything work. They just didn't feel it yet. But they would. Very soon. Experience teaches you to recognize patterns long before they become problems. And in that room, I had already seen enough. The meeting ended the way those meetings always do. Clean, efficient, no raised voices, no visible conflict, just a quiet assumption from their side that everything would proceed according to plan. I closed my laptop and stepped out into the hallway without looking back. By the time I reached the parking lot, my phone was already buzzing. An email from Taryn. Subject line system architecture documentation request. No greeting, no transition language. Just a direct demand for a full breakdown of all operational system components for internal evaluation. Operational system components. I read that phrase twice. 5 years of custom-built manufacturing logic reduced to a line item. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I got into my truck and drove home, letting the silence settle. There's a difference between reacting and preparing, and I've learned often the hard way that timing matters more than speed. By the time I reached my workshop, I knew exactly what she was trying to do. She wasn't just replacing me. She was trying to absorb the system, eliminate the cost, keep the functionality, present it as a clean internal transition, a textbook move. If the system had been what she thought it was. Inside the workshop, the air smelled faintly of solder and machine oil. Against the far wall sat the control rack custom hardware I had built piece by piece over the years. Nothing flashy, no polished casing, just dense functional engineering designed to do one thing perfectly: coordinate a living, breathing manufacturing network in real time. I powered up the console. One by one, the indicators lit green. 12 facilities, 89 synchronized production stations, hundreds of active processes feeding into a system that didn't just monitor activity, it controlled it. Every adjustment, every timing sequence, every correction, all flowing through infrastructure they had never seen. I opened the main dashboard. From their side, it would look like a standard interface, clean visuals, real-time metrics, predictive alerts. But what they didn't understand was that those screens were just reflections. Like looking into a mirror and thinking you're seeing the engine. The real system lived here, under my control. I sat down, pulled up the original contract, and scrolled to the section I already knew by heart. Section 7. Ownership and licensing. Clear, precise, impossible to misinterpret. They had purchased access, nothing more. I drafted my response carefully. Professional, neutral, technically accurate. Happy to provide all materials included under your current operational license. I didn't explain further. Didn't need to. If Taryn Blake wanted documentation, I would give her exactly what she was entitled to receive. No more, no less. I hit send. Then I leaned back and let out a slow breath. Because now the timeline had shifted. Not in their favor. In mine. Over the next 3 days, the emails escalated. Follow-ups, clarifications, requests framed as expectations. Then came the next message. Subject line intellectual property clarification. This one was more direct. She wanted written confirmation that all system logic belonged to the company, not access, ownership. I opened the contract again, captured the relevant clause, and sent it back without commentary. Bold text, unambiguous language. All system architecture source code and operational infrastructure remained my property. Licensed, not transferred. 6 hours later, her reply came in. Short, decisive. We will proceed with internal systems management, effective immediately. Final payment will be processed per contract terms. That was it. No negotiation, no acknowledgement, just a decision. I read the message once, then again. And this time, I allowed myself a small smile. Because that wasn't just a termination, it was a trigger. They believed they were cutting a dependency. In reality, they were severing the only connection holding their entire operation together. I stood up and walked over to the control panel. The system was still running perfectly. Every process aligned, every facility synchronized. From the outside, nothing had changed, but underneath, the clock had already started. 6 days later, a calendar invite appeared. No explanation, no context. Just a time and a title. System Transition Meeting, Friday morning. I joined 3 minutes early. Camera on. Neutral background. Certifications visible behind me, not staged just where they had always been. 28 years of work framed quietly on the wall. The kind of details people like Taryn Blake never noticed until they needed them. She logged in 2 minutes late. Confident, composed, already convinced the outcome was decided. A man from IT joined next to Brad Coleman, according to his display. Then a younger woman, probably an analyst, fingers hovering over her tablet, ready to document what she assumed would be a routine handover. No one from operations. That told me everything. Let's keep this efficient. Taryn began leaning slightly forward. We're transitioning all system management internally. We appreciate your past contributions, but we're ready to assume full control moving forward. Assume control. The phrase hung there, detached from reality. I nodded once. You're terminating the license agreement, I said. Yes, she replied without hesitation. And as part of that transition, we'll need full delivery of all system components. Code repositories, backend access architecture documentation, standard process. Brad nodded along, clearly expecting files to be transferred. The analyst began typing. They had rehearsed this, prepared for a transaction, not a boundary. You're not licensed to access the core infrastructure, I said calmly. Your agreement covers operational outputs, not the system itself. Brad frowned. Taryn didn't. We paid for development, she said, tone sharpening again. That includes the system. I held her gaze. You paid for results, I replied, not the engine that produces them. Silence. This time longer. Brad's confidence slipped first. His eyes shifted, scanning something off-screen. The analyst stopped typing entirely. Taryn stayed still. Then slowly, she leaned back. Provide whatever documentation you have, she said, cutting off the discussion. We'll handle the rest internally. I nodded. I will provide everything you're entitled to. Nothing more. She ended the call quickly after that. No closing remarks, no acknowledgement. Just a quiet exit from a conversation she thought she had already won. I closed my laptop and sat there for a moment. Then I stood up and walked out to the workshop. The control panel was already running. Every system stable, every indicator green. From their perspective, everything still worked. That was the beauty of it. I powered up my workstation and began assembling the transition package. Professional formatting, clean diagrams, polished system overviews, user interface screenshots showing real-time dashboards, production metrics, predictive maintenance visuals, all the things that made the system look complete. Look operational, look controllable. I spent hours refining it. Not because it needed to function, but because it needed to convince. Because what I was building wasn't a system, it was an illusion, a perfect surface with nothing underneath. No control pathways, no execution logic, no access to the infrastructure that actually synchronized 12 facilities across 4 states. Just enough to make someone believe they had what they needed. By late afternoon, the package was ready. Comprehensive, impressive, completely useless. I attached it to an email. Subject line simple, neutral, system interface documentation delivered per contract terms. No explanation, no warning, just one sentence in the body. Back-end infrastructure access is not included under current licensing. I hit send, watched it disappear into their system. And somewhere in an office I couldn't see, Taryn Blake was about to open a file that looked like control, but wasn't. I stepped away from the desk and walked back to the control panel. The system hummed quietly, steady, responsive, alive. I placed my hand lightly on the primary relay switch. Not yet. Timing matters. Outside, the world continued like nothing had changed. Inside their facilities, dashboards still displayed green indicators. Supervisors still trusted their screens. Schedules still appeared synchronized. But all of it depended on something they didn't know existed, and they had just removed the only person who could maintain it. I looked at the relay again. Then I smiled, because the moment they tried to take full control was the moment they would lose it completely. The next morning felt ordinary. That was the point. I drove out to a small diner off the interstate, the kind of place where no one asked questions, and the coffee kept coming without needing to be ordered twice. I took my usual seat by the window, set my laptop on the table, and opened the system console. Everything was still green. 12 facilities, 89 synchronized stations, production lines moving in perfect coordination, quality control cycling cleanly through inspection checkpoints. On the surface, nothing had changed. From their perspective, the system was working exactly as expected. From mine, it was simply waiting. I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug and watched the live dashboard update in real time. Data streams flowed smoothly across the screen. Metrics refreshed. Alerts remained silent. The illusion held. At that moment, somewhere inside Sterling's corporate office, Taryn Blake was likely reviewing the documentation I had sent. Clean diagrams, polished interfaces. Enough to give her confidence. Enough to convince her she had control. At 9:47 in the morning, my phone buzzed. A message from Taryn. We're having difficulty accessing root management interface. Provide admin credentials immediately. I read it once. Then I deleted it. No response. At 9:52, I reached into my bag, pulled out a small access key, and opened the remote control panel interface. One command. That was all it took. I toggled the primary relay. On my screen, the system didn't crash. It didn't throw warnings. It simply stopped communicating. Every green indicator faded to gray. Data feeds froze mid-update. Synchronization signals ceased. Coordination logic halted without noise or error. The system didn't fail. It disconnected. I took a slow sip of coffee and watched it happen in silence. That was intentional. I had designed it that way years ago, no alarms, no dramatic shutdowns. If the system ever lost its control source, it would separate cleanly, leaving behind a perfectly intact interface. A mirror. From the outside, everything still appeared functional. Dashboards continued to display the last valid data. Status indicators remained green. Supervisors looking at their screens would see normal operations. But underneath, nothing was moving. At first, no one noticed. For the next 20 minutes, production continued, based on the last received instructions. Machines followed cached commands. Workers stayed on schedule. The illusion held just long enough. Then the cracks began. At 10:14, one of the assembly robots stopped mid-cycle. Waiting. Not broken, just waiting for a synchronization signal that would never come. At 10:23, 2 quality inspectors arrived at the same station, both assigned to the same task. Their devices showed identical instructions. The conflict resolution system wasn't running. At 10:35, the pattern spread. Production bottlenecks formed across multiple lines. Conveyor systems kept moving, while upstream processes stalled. Timing mismatches began to stack small errors, multiplying into larger disruptions. Still, the dashboards showed green. Because the dashboards weren't alive. They were reflections. I opened the live camera feeds. One by one, I watched the system unravel. Workers hesitating, supervisors checking screens, then looking back at machines that weren't behaving as expected. Conversations starting to form in clusters. Confusion first, then doubt. At 10:44, the first email arrived. Subject: quick question, data sync delay. Hey, seeing some lag in production updates. Can you take a look? Polite. Controlled. Still assuming this was a minor issue. I didn't reply. More messages followed. Data not refreshing. Duplicate assignments. Systems responding inconsistently. Still calm, still manageable. At 11 o'clock, my phone started ringing. Unknown numbers. Internal extensions. Repeated attempts. I let them all go. By 11:25, the tone had changed. Emails flagged urgent. Language tightening. Questions turning into demands. Production delays. Quality conflicts. Scheduling breakdowns. At 11:32, the first real signal of panic appeared. Subject: urgent, critical system failure. Multiple operational conflicts. Coordination controls unresponsive. Immediate assistance required. I read the message, then closed it. Outside the diner window, traffic moved normally. People walked in and out, unaware that a 12-facility manufacturing network was slowly grinding itself into chaos. Inside, I opened the impact estimator. Conservative calculation. 2.3 million in losses per day. And rising. I leaned back in the booth, watching the screen. Not with satisfaction, with certainty. Because this wasn't sabotage. This was exactly what happens. When someone believes they own something they never truly understood. If you think I handled this the right way by staying calm, following the contract exactly, and letting the system reveal the truth on its own, then drop a 1 in the comments. I'm curious how many of you would have done the same. By 11:46 in the morning, the calls changed. It wasn't just operations anymore. Legal started calling. The first one came through with a clear caller ID Sterling Legal Department. I let it ring until it stopped, then watched the voicemail notification appear without opening it. Seconds later, another call came in from a blocked number. Then another. They weren't asking for help anymore. They were trying to regain control. I opened the system logs on my laptop and watched the activity spike. Hundreds of authentication attempts were hitting the interface I had delivered the day before. Credentials being tested, access requests escalating, handshake signals firing into nothing. Every request returned the same result. No connection. Because there was nothing there to connect to. They were trying to run a manufacturing network using a surface layer and interface without an engine. From their perspective, it made no sense. From mine, it was exactly how I designed it. At 12 o'clock, the scale of the failure had become undeniable. Production lines across multiple facilities were no longer just delayed, they were gridlocked. Equipment was idling in some areas, while others continued moving without coordination. Quality teams were flagging inconsistencies faster than they could process them. And the system, the one they believed they now controlled, still showed stability. That was the part that broke them. Because when reality and data don't match, panic sets in fast. My phone buzzed again. A message this time. Emergency situation. Call immediately. Taryn. I looked at it for a few seconds, then deleted it. Silence is a form of leverage most people underestimate. At 12:13, another email came through. Subject: immediate executive escalation. This one was different. No casual tone. No assumptions. No attempt to minimize the issue. Full operational disruption across multiple facilities. System coordination non-functional. OEM delivery schedules at risk. Immediate support required. They finally understood, not the system, but the consequences. I closed the email and opened a new document. Blank screen, no formatting yet, just a title. Emergency System Restoration Proposal. I paused for a moment, thinking through the structure. Not emotional, not reactive, precise, controlled. I started typing. Restoration terms, payment conditions, time window, scope of service, every line clear, every clause enforceable. 3 times the standard monthly rate. Full payment upfront, wire transfer only. 48-hour emergency service window. Explicit acknowledgement of intellectual property ownership. No ambiguity, no room for reinterpretation. Because this wasn't negotiation. This was correction. I attached the document to a new email, addressed it to Taryn Blake, legal counsel, and the operations director. Subject line simple: emergency restoration services available. No explanation in the body, just the document. I sent it, then closed the laptop. Around me, the diner continued its quiet rhythm. Plates clinked, coffee poured. Conversations drifted between booths. Normal, completely normal. And somewhere in a corporate office that had been running on assumptions just hours ago, a different atmosphere had taken hold. Pressure, confusion, accountability. At 12:53, the calendar invite arrived. Emergency conference call. 1 o'clock. No greeting, no formalities, just urgency. I checked the time. Still a few minutes to go. I reopened the console briefly. The system remained disconnected. Not broken. Waiting. Exactly where I left it. I closed the screen again and finished my coffee. Because the next conversation wouldn't be about what went wrong. It would be about what it would cost to make it work again. I joined the call 3 minutes early, camera on. Same background, same quiet room. Nothing rushed, nothing reactive. One by one they appeared on screen. Not the same people as before. This wasn't a transition meeting anymore. This was escalation. A senior vice president joined first, Alan Brooks. Sleeves rolled up tie, loosened the look of someone who had spent the last few hours trying to contain something already out of control. 2 attorneys followed, one scanning documents, the other taking rapid notes. Then, operations faces I recognized this time. People who actually understood what was happening on the ground. Taryn Blake was already there. Muted. Still. No opening remarks. Alan didn't waste time. "Thank you for joining on short notice," he said, voice controlled but tight. "We're experiencing a significant operational disruption across our network. We need to understand what's required to restore full functionality immediately. Not what happened, not why. What it would take." That was progress. "You terminated the service agreement," I said calmly. "The system is no longer active under your license." One of the attorneys leaned forward. "We've reviewed your proposal," she said. "There are concerns regarding the pricing structure given the circumstances." I nodded once. "Emergency response pricing," I replied. "Standard when critical infrastructure fails during business operations. No emotion, just facts." Mike Rodriguez appeared in one of the lower windows, floor supervisor, former military. He didn't look surprised. "Production is backing up across all 12 facilities," he said. "We've got coordination failures at multiple points. OEM contracts are already at risk." He paused, then added quietly, "We need this fixed." Alan stepped back in. "We're not here to debate responsibility," he said. "We're here to resolve the situation. Is there flexibility in the terms? No." The word settled into the silence. Clean. Final. Taryn unmuted. "This is unreasonable," she said, voice sharper now. "You're holding our operations hostage over a contractual technicality." I looked directly at the camera. "You terminated access to a system you never owned," I said. "I provided exactly what your contract entitled you to receive. Nothing more, nothing less." She opened her mouth to respond, but Alan cut her off with a glance. Control had shifted. One of the attorneys tried again. "Would you consider structured payment terms?" she asked. "Installments, perhaps, wire transfer," I said. "Full payment. Before reactivation, no hesitation, no adjustment." Mike leaned forward. "If we approve this," he said, "how long until systems are operational again?" 30 minutes, I replied. "From confirmed transfer." That answer landed. Fast. Precise. Real. Alan exchanged a look with legal, then nodded. We need a few minutes. I leaned back slightly. I'll be here. They moved into a private breakout. The screen shifted, and suddenly it was just me. And Taryn. Her camera stayed on. She didn't speak, just watched. For a moment, I thought she might say something, explain, justify, shift blame. She didn't, because there was nothing left to say. This wasn't about authority anymore. It was about consequence. I checked my email while they were gone. The proposal had already been forwarded internally, finance risk, executive leadership, threads branching out, questions stacking, everyone trying to understand how something this controlled had unraveled so quickly. 8 minutes later, they returned. Alan spoke first. We're initiating the transfer now, he said. You'll have confirmation shortly. I nodded once. No acknowledgement beyond that. 27 minutes later, my phone vibrated. Incoming wire notification. Amount correct. No delay. No negotiation. I stood up, walked out to the workshop, and powered on the control panel. Every system still waiting. Disconnected but intact. I placed my hand on the relay, then flipped it. One motion. Immediate response. Indicators lit green across the board. Data streams reconnected. Synchronization signals resumed. Production nodes began realigning in real time. The system didn't struggle back to life. It returned instantly, like it had never left. I walked back to the desk and rejoined the call. They're operational, I said. No build-up, no explanation. Alan exhaled slowly. Thank you, he said. I held his gaze. I didn't do this quickly, I replied. I did this according to the terms you agreed to. Silence followed. Taryn said nothing. I ended the call, because the lesson wasn't in what I said. It was in what they had just paid to understand. For the next 72 hours, nothing came. No emails, no calls, no follow-up requests, just silence. Not the calm kind, the controlled kind. I monitored the system from my kitchen table the same way I had done hundreds of times before. Every dashboard ran clean, every process aligned perfectly. Production stabilized across all 12 facilities, as if the disruption had never happened. But I knew better. Systems don't forget stress. They recover, and so do people. Inside Sterling, something had shifted. You could see it in the data patterns alone. Manual overrides dropped to near zero. Redundant alerts normally ignored were suddenly acknowledged within seconds. Quality checks tightened. Timing margins increased. The entire network moved with a level of caution that hadn't existed before. They weren't just running the system, they were respecting it. And that only happens after something breaks. I didn't reach out, didn't ask questions, didn't offer additional support, because this wasn't a relationship that needed repair, it needed recalibration. On the morning of the 4th day, a new email arrived. Different sender, different tone. Subject line, strategic partnership, discussion revised terms. I opened it slowly. No urgency, no pressure, just structure. The sender introduced himself as Steve Davis, Vice President of Strategic Operations. No mention of Taryn Blake anywhere in the message. No reference to the incident. No attempt to revisit what had happened. Only forward movement. Professional language. Respectful phrasing. Clear acknowledgement of my ownership rights. That part mattered. They had learned. The proposal itself was substantial. 5-year exclusive agreement, increased compensation, priority involvement in expansion projects, explicit clauses recognizing intellectual property boundaries. Everything Taryn had ignored, now written in precise, careful language. I read it twice, not for the numbers, for the intent. Because the difference between desperation and strategy is easy to miss if you're only looking at surface details. This wasn't desperation. This was correction. Someone inside that company had stepped in and realigned the conversation. Someone who understood what had just happened. I closed the email and sat there for a moment. Then I opened a blank document. If they wanted a new agreement, it would be built properly. I started drafting. Clause by clause, Ownership protections reinforced, licensing terms expanded, access limitations defined in language that couldn't be misinterpreted or reinterpreted by someone skimming for cost reductions. No shortcuts, no assumptions. Because I wasn't just protecting the system anymore, I was protecting the conditions under which it could exist. 3 weeks later, the signed contract arrived. Every clause intact. No revisions, no negotiation, just signatures. And one absence. Taryn Blake's name wasn't anywhere on it. Not in the approvals, not in the correspondence, not even in the internal references. I didn't ask what happened. Didn't need to. Organizations don't remove names without reason. I closed the document and walked out to the workshop. The control panel hummed quietly steady, as always. Indicators, glowing green systems, flowing in perfect synchronization. Nothing had changed on the surface. But underneath, everything was different. Word travels fast in manufacturing. By the end of the month, I started receiving inquiries. Detroit, Indianapolis, Louisville, different companies. Same question. Are you available? They had heard. Not the full story, just enough. Enough to understand what happens when someone mistakes access for ownership. Enough to know who actually controls the system. I sat down at my desk and opened a new file. 2025 Standard Service Agreement. Because this wasn't the end of something, it was the beginning of a different level. One where the terms were clear from the start, and the system was never misunderstood again. Reputation doesn't spread through announcements. It moves quietly, through conversations that aren't meant to include you. Within a week, I noticed the shift. The emails weren't random inquiries anymore. They were precise, targeted. People who knew exactly what to ask, and more importantly, what not to ask. Availability for custom infrastructure. Consultation on system ownership structures. Long-term control architecture design. They weren't asking about features. They were asking about control. That told me everything. I opened the first message from a supplier group out of Detroit. Mid-sized operation. Multiple facilities. The tone was cautious, almost deliberate, like they were testing the boundaries before stepping further. We're looking to avoid dependency risks in our current system architecture. Dependency risks. I leaned back slightly. That phrase hadn't come from a consultant's slide deck. That came from experience. Someone had learned something. The next message came from Indianapolis. Larger operation, more formal language, but the same underlying concern. Interested in structuring a system where operational access and ownership remain clearly separated. There it was again. Not performance, not efficiency. Ownership. By the third message, the pattern was undeniable. Louisville. Distribution-heavy network. High volume. Tight margins. We heard you specialize in systems that maintain operational integrity under transition. Heard. That was the word that mattered. Because no one had announced anything. Sterling hadn't issued statements. There were no public reports, no headlines. But internally, people talk. Supervisors talk to suppliers. Suppliers talk to partners. And somewhere in that chain, the story had moved stripped down to its core. A system, a termination, and what happened when someone tried to take something they didn't understand. I didn't rush to respond. That's another lesson experience teaches you. Not every opportunity needs to be taken immediately. Some need to be shaped. I opened the draft of my new standard agreement and began refining it further. Not just for Sterling, for everything that would come after. Clear ownership boundaries, explicit control definitions, operational access separated from infrastructure authority in language that couldn't be simplified or ignored. Because what had happened wasn't unique, it was predictable. Companies don't fail because systems break. They fail because someone assumes they understand what they don't. And acts on it. I closed one email, opened another, each one a variation of the same request. Control, clarity, protection. I responded carefully, short messages, direct. No unnecessary detail. Availability limited. Engagement subject to review. Terms defined up front. Because I wasn't just offering a service anymore. I was setting a standard. Across every conversation, one detail remained consistent. No one asked me to hand anything over. No one requested full access without context. No one assumed ownership. They had learned. Not from documentation, not from policy, from consequence. I stood up and walked toward the workshop. The control panel was steady as always, lights consistent, systems aligned, quiet efficiency running through something most people would never fully understand. I placed my hand lightly against the edge of the console, not as a reminder of control, but of responsibility. Because what I built wasn't just infrastructure, it was trust. And once that's broken, it doesn't come back easily. Behind me, my laptop screen lit up again. Another message, another company, same question. Can you help us build something we actually control? I looked at the screen for a moment. Then I smiled. Because now, they were asking the right question. Most people think control is something you can see. A dashboard, a report, a clean interface with numbers updating in real time. That's what Taryn Blake believed. That's what almost all of them believe until the moment the screen stops reflecting reality. I've spent nearly 3 decades building systems, and if there's one thing experience teaches you, it's this. What you see is never the system. It's just the surface. The real system lives underneath, inside the logic, the timing, the invisible connections that keep everything moving when no one is watching. It lives in the decisions made years before, in the structure no one bothers to question because it works, until someone decides they understand it better than the person who built it. That's when things break. Not because the system is fragile, but because someone removes the only thing holding it together. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't try to prove anything. I followed the contract. Exactly. And I let the system do what it was designed to do, respond to reality, not assumptions. That's the part most people miss. Control isn't about ownership on paper. It's about understanding. It's about knowing where the system actually lives, and what happens when it's no longer supported. Taryn thought she was eliminating a dependency. What she actually did was expose one. And once it was exposed, there was no way to ignore it. No way to spin it. No way to fix it without acknowledging the truth. That's why the call changed. That's why the tone shifted. That's why the contract came back different. Because at some point, someone in that organization realized something simple. They didn't lose control when the system stopped. They never had it. I walked back into the workshop and stood in front of the control panel one last time that evening. Everything was running smoothly. Every process aligned. No noise, no errors. Just quiet, consistent execution. The way it was always meant to be. I reached out and rested my hand on the edge of the console, not to change anything, just to feel the steady vibration of something working exactly as intended. That's what real systems do. They don't demand attention. They don't announce their importance. They just work, until someone underestimates them. I turned off the lights and walked out, closing the door behind me. Not with satisfaction, not with pride, just with clarity. Because in the end, this was never about revenge. It was about something much simpler, knowing what you built, protecting it, and understanding the difference between access and control. 3 weeks after the new agreement was signed, the first implementation meeting was scheduled. Different room, different tone. This time, operations led the call. No polished introductions, no abstract language about efficiency or cost optimization. Just direct questions from people who understood what failure looked like in real time. What happens if coordination drops again? How is control separated from interface access? Where exactly does the system live? They weren't asking for reassurance. They were asking for clarity. I answered each one the same way I always do, without simplifying it for comfort. The interface is what you see, I said. Control is what you don't. I walked them through the architecture, layer by layer, user access, operational outputs, control pathways, and finally, the infrastructure they had never considered before. No one interrupted. No one tried to reframe it into something easier to digest, because now they understood the cost of misunderstanding. The legal team joined midway through the call, not to challenge, to confirm. Ownership remains external, one of the attorneys said, reading directly from the contract. Operational access granted under defined conditions. No replication or derivative development permitted. Clear. Final. No reinterpretation. I nodded. That's correct. There was no resistance this time. No attempt to push boundaries. Because boundaries had already been tested and the result was still fresh in everyone's mind. After the call ended, I received a follow-up message from Steve Davis. Short, direct. Appreciate the clarity. We won't repeat that mistake. I read it once. Then close the message. Because that sentence carried more weight than anything written in the contract. It meant the lesson had landed, not as a policy, but as experience. Over the next few weeks, the implementation moved forward without friction. System adjustments were requested properly. Changes were reviewed before execution. Every decision passed through the structure we had defined. No shortcuts, no assumptions, and most importantly, no one tried to take control of something they didn't fully understand. The difference was visible, not just in performance metrics, in behavior. Supervisors relied less on surface data and more on process flow. Managers asked better questions. IT stopped trying to optimize systems they couldn't see and focused instead on supporting what was already working. Even communication changed. Clearer, more precise. Because once you've experienced a failure like that, you stop pretending complexity doesn't exist. You start respecting it. One afternoon, I received an internal report from Sterling. Not required, not requested, just sent. It detailed performance improvements over the past month, stability metrics, response times, production alignment, all trending upward. At the bottom, a single note. No unauthorized system modifications, all processes validated through defined control structure. I read that line twice, then saved the file, because that was the real outcome, not the payment, not the contract. Discipline. And discipline is what keeps systems alive. I shut down my laptop and stepped outside. The air was quiet, steady, the kind of stillness you only notice when everything is working exactly as it should. And for the first time since the transition, I didn't need to monitor anything, not because the system didn't require attention, but because the people interacting with it had finally learned what it meant to respect it. That's the difference most companies never reach. They either control the system or they learn from it. Sterling had done both, just not in the order they expected. There's a moment in every system where everything looks stable, no alerts, no noise, no visible tension. That's when most people assume control has been achieved. But stability isn't proof of control. It's proof that something somewhere is still holding everything together. The difference is subtle and expensive to misunderstand. What happened at Sterling wasn't unique. It wasn't even unusual. It's the natural result of decisions made without context of authority applied, without understanding of systems treated like tools instead of structures. I didn't create that outcome. I just didn't stop it. I followed the agreement. I stayed within the boundaries that had been clearly defined from the beginning. And when those boundaries were ignored, the system responded exactly the way it was designed to. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just correctly. That's what most people struggle with. They expect conflict to look loud. They expect consequences to come with warnings. But real systems don't work that way. They don't argue. They don't negotiate. They reflect reality. And if reality has been misunderstood, they reveal it, cleanly, completely, without explanation. I didn't need to prove anything. The system did that for me. And once it did, everything else changed. Not just the contract, not just the structure, the mindset. Because once someone sees the gap between what they thought they controlled and what they actually did, they don't forget it. They adjust. Or they repeat the mistake somewhere else. That choice is always there. For them. For you. For anyone who builds something others depend on. If you've ever created something valuable, something complex, something that works quietly in the background, then you already understand what this story is really about. It's not about power. It's about clarity. knowing exactly what you own, knowing exactly what others are allowed to use, and never confusing the two. Because the moment that line blurs, control becomes an illusion, and illusions don't last long. I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't try to win the room. I simply stood on what I had built, and more importantly, what I had protected. That experience taught me something most people only learn after they lose everything. Your value isn't just in what you create, but in how clearly you define the boundaries around it. Skills matter, effort matters, but if you don't understand ownership control and the rules that govern both, someone else will rewrite your story for you. There was a moment in that room where I could have reacted emotionally, tried to argue, tried to explain. But I chose something harder. I let reality reveal itself. So I want to ask you, if you were in that position, would you fight for recognition, or would you quietly make sure the system speaks for you? Because sometimes dignity isn't loud. It's precise, it's patient, and it's built long before the moment you need it. If this story made you pause even for a second, then you're already part of something bigger. Every like, every comment, every share helps this message reach someone who might be standing in their own conference room moment, right now, unsure of what to do. And your action could be the reason they choose clarity over chaos. If you feel that, consider subscribing, because you're not just watching these stories, you're helping them matter. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.